They arrived late. Not in a hurry, not apologetic. Just late. The other species had already begun their live-fire drills, sleek, precise weapons slicing through drone targets with surgical energy bursts. The humans stepped off the shuttle without fanfare, 8 of them in dull, dust-covered armor. No insignias, no display. One of them carried something long, wrapped in cloth and strapped over his back like a primitive spear. The moment they walked past the other squads, the murmurs began. "That's a weapon," scoffed a Varaxian lieutenant, his green crest trembling with amusement. "Looks like something dug up from a pre-fusion museum." A Zalari engineer chuckled. "Maybe it's ceremonial? Tribal pride or something." A Zovani commander leaned closer, his compound eyes narrowing at the object. "I've seen ancient Terran weapon archives. That looks like a projectile launcher. Kinetic, not even magnetic. Obsolete." The humans didn't react. Not to the laughter, the jabs, or the whispers. The one carrying the weapon, a tall, silent man with a steady gait, stopped beside the observation deck, unslung the cloth bundle, and sat on a crate. With slow, practiced movements, he began cleaning the weapon. A long barrel, matte black finish, weighted stock, a relic. The aliens watched with amusement. No plasma coils, no digital indicators, no power unit. Just a bolt, a trigger, and a steel barrel long enough to be considered absurd. "Why not throw rocks instead?" muttered a Generi scout, the laughter swelling again. "They call that a rifle," said another, barely containing his smirk. "An anti-tank rifle, from what I've read. Must have mistaken this training moon for a museum." Amid the growing mockery, the human didn't raise his head. He adjusted the scope manually. No AR interface, no neural sync, just optics and windage dials. He pulled a round from a pouch, massive, brass-cased, and as long as some species' forearms, and loaded it with a solid, satisfying clack. A Charnax weapons analyst walked closer and scanned the rifle with his visor. Projectile-based, chemical propellant. Effective range crude, inaccurate by Galactic standards. And loud, extremely loud. More laughter. The rest of the human unit stayed quiet, watching, as if they'd seen this scene unfold before. It wasn't the first time they'd been underestimated. Not the first time someone laughed at old human weapons. A Saravani diplomat, there only as an observer, leaned toward the captain overseeing the session. Why do they even allow that weapon in standardized coalition drills? Political courtesy, the captain replied. Let them play with their antiques. It's harmless. The observer turned back to watch the human polish the steel barrel. Harmless, yes, but why does it feel like they know something we don't? The human clicked the safety off, then glanced across the field. The others were done firing. Target drones lay in smoldering heaps, and now it was their turn. The human stood up. The rifle gleamed under the harsh sun. "Begin," came the order from command. No theatrics, no bravado. The human dropped prone, adjusted the bipod, and took aim. The aliens were still laughing when the first round fired. The sound was deafening. Not the soft whine of an energy pulse, but a bone-rattling boom that echoed across the rocky basin. One of the armored mechs on the far range shuddered, then dropped. Its front armor peeled open like a crushed can. Silence. No one moved. The second shot came 3 seconds later. Another mech, further out, exploded in sparks and crumpled. Then a third. Another drone gone. By the fourth shot, no one was laughing. The human stood, reloaded with a casual, almost lazy rhythm, and fired again. Precision. Power. Devastation. Targets that took teams of coordinated plasma fire to destroy were dropping with single shots. The captain muttered something under his breath. The analyst checked his scanner again. Impact force exceeds 18,000 joules. Velocity, sublight, but it's punching through alloys we've rated for orbital defense. The Charnax stepped back. Someone else whispered, "That's not just a relic. That's a monster." And the human hadn't even broken a sweat. No speech, no explanation, just calm, terrifying efficiency. The human shouldered the rifle again and turned back toward the shuttle, ignoring the stunned stares. The aliens didn't speak. Not this time. But something had changed. That weapon, so easy to mock minutes ago, now hung in the air like a challenge, one they didn't know how to answer. The range officer called for the next phase. A sequence of dynamic threats, moving targets, shielded drones, armored crawlers, deployed across the field. Coalition teams took position. The Zalari squad opened with synchronized plasma bursts, melting drone after drone with clinical precision. They cheered at their efficiency, flaunting their weaponry's sleek form and high-tech tracking systems. The Generii followed, their multi-barrel particle casters vaporizing the lighter drones in dazzling flashes. High Command watched with approving nods. Data streamed in. Impressive results, as expected. Then came the humans. No formation. No chatter. The same man stepped forward again, rifle slung. The others remained behind him. He moved to the firing line. The range officer hesitated, then signaled him forward with visible skepticism. The targets for this round were heavier, mobile tankettes simulating battlefield mechs, reinforced alloys, reactive armor, energy shielding, the kind of threats designed to test modern weaponry. The human lay prone. He loaded one round. The tankette advanced, flanked by two shielded drones. From the viewing deck, a Varaxian instructor scoffed. "Let's see how far this ancient thunderstick gets now." The human fired. The cracks split the air, sharper than before. The tankette jerked violently, its front left wheel blown apart. It tipped, caught fire, then detonated seconds later as its internal systems failed. Observers leaned forward. Second shot, center mass on a moving drone. The energy shield flared, shattered, and the drone's core flared in a cascade of sparks. Down. Third shot, right through a reinforced composite plate on the next tankette. Straight through. The mech's rear exploded outward. System failure. Collapse. No computer targeting. No guided tracking. Just breath control, aim, and kinetic death. A Zalari engineer swore. What even is that scope? No thermal? No AI assist? The Saravani observer answered flatly. Optical. Manual. Range dialed. The human reloaded. 4 rounds left in the magazine. He adjusted windage. Fired again. Drone down. Even at a distance, the weapon's sheer force left visible impact trails. Chunks of armor flying. The ground cratered where rounds missed by inches. The weapon didn't hum. It thundered. The enemy simulacra weren't disabled. They were ruined. One of the command analysts pulled up projectile metrics. High mass, solid core, tungsten carbide penetrator. Velocity over 850 meters per second. That's not a gun. That's a rail spike with an attitude. The alien officers no longer laughed. They leaned in, eyes narrowing, trying to decode the rifle's effect on their expectations. This wasn't a novelty anymore. It was a problem they didn't have a solution for. The rifle wasn't fast. It wasn't smart. But it was final. Final in a way that their precision weapons weren't. Their plasma melted. Their railguns punched. Their lasers burned. But none of their weapons left the same brutal certainty, a single, unambiguous end to whatever it hit. Final in a way that screamed, "You are done." The human emptied the magazine. 6 rounds. 6 kills. One by one. He stood, slid a fresh magazine into the receiver. No rush. No performance. The range officer, pale now, checked the system logs. Every shot logged. Every target confirmed. No misses. Another officer stepped forward, skeptical. Could have been preset. Drones configured to fail. The analyst shook his head. I checked. Full combat AI. No tampering. If anything, they were above standard difficulty. Someone in the back whispered, "That thing shouldn't work." But it does. The human rejoined his squad. None of them spoke. They hadn't moved once. It was routine to them. The watching officers began murmuring, quietly now. Less mockery, more questions. Speculation. Worry. Because what they had just witnessed wasn't novelty. It was doctrine, human doctrine. Primitive. Analog. Brutal. And terrifyingly effective. For centuries, the coalition had evolved beyond ballistics. Projectiles were outdated. Too much weight. Too much recoil. Too much chaos. But the anti-tank rifle, in the hands of a human, made a different argument. One that echoed through steel, smoke, and cratered armor. No targeting system could match the judgment of someone who trained with recoil. No overclocked optic could compensate for experience gauging wind, distance, and timing by feel. No plasma rifle could punch through reactive plating like sheer kinetic rage could. And none of the aliens, none of them, had anything quite like it. The exercise ended. No scores were announced. No praise given. But everyone knew. The humans had changed the conversation. And all it took was 6 shots. The alarm wasn't a drill. The sharp, oscillating tone cut through the training field, followed by a command broadcast in every coalition language. Hostile incursion, real enemy contacts inbound, full combat readiness. The air shifted instantly. No more mockery. No more posture. Soldiers scrambled for position. Command relays buzzed. Automated defenses activated. Enemy forces identified as rogue, mercenary machines, heavily armored, shielded, and unrelenting, descended onto the moon's surface in staggered waves. The coalition's finest snapped into practiced response. Plasma coils warmed. Drone wings launched. But the first volley from the enemy changed everything. An unseen pulse swept across the sky. EMP-style bursts shut down multiple systems. Drones plummeted. HUDs blinked and died. Plasma rifles flickered, then darkened completely. Dozens of alien soldiers stood paralyzed, staring down non-responsive weapons. Panic crept in. Shouts overlapped. Power reserves were offline. Shield generators stuttered and collapsed. Command tried to regroup, but their comms were compromised. Tactical coordination broke down in seconds. The humans moved. Without ceremony, they fanned out. Analog rifles, optical scopes, manual positioning. Not one of them hesitated. While coalition soldiers fumbled with reboot sequences and dead gear, the humans were already in cover, calculating angles, establishing lines of fire. And then the anti-tank rifle thundered. One shot, a walking gun platform, 20 meters tall, lost its sensor dome in an instant. The second shot cracked through the machine's side armor, detonating an internal core. Collapse. Fire. The rest of the enemy units adjusted, redirecting toward the humans, now the only functioning resistance on the field. They weren't fast. They weren't flashy. But they didn't need to be. Every time the rifle fired, something critical on the enemy side ceased to exist. Leg joints, core vents, targeting arrays. Pieces of war machines exploded in methodical sequence, as if a checklist was being executed one shot at a time. The rest of the coalition ducked behind rocks and supply crates, watching in disbelief as their advanced technology lay dead in their hands, while humans, equipped with what they once called relics, held the line. One Zalari soldier, pinned by a crawler drone, was moment for being crushed when a 20mm round removed the drone's entire upper chassis. The aliens began crawling toward the human's position. Some begged for protection. Others simply followed, no longer pretending they knew better. The humans made space, handed out analog sidearms. Quick tutorials barked between shots. A Zovani squad, never trained on chemical propellant weapons, fumbled with a pump-action shotgun, but clung to it like a lifeline. The enemy pressed harder, but the humans didn't break. The anti-tank rifle's recoil thundered again and again. Its wielder adjusted zero by feel. He didn't need a targeting drone to make the call. He needed sight, breath, and time. That was enough. An armored quadruped breached the outer ridge. 3 humans focused it. The rifle cracked. Its leg split. It stumbled. A second shot, center mass. Breach. Internal chain reaction. Gone. No war cry. No glory chant. Just raw, practice destruction. The coalition officers, buried under collapsed command shelters, watched through fractured glass. Their own weapons were still dead weight. Their drone legions were scrap. And the only functioning defense between them and total annihilation was the same primitive squad they had ridiculed. The Saravani observer, his translator unit barely functional, muttered something the captain had to ask twice to hear. "They're not low-tech," he repeated. "They're non-dependent." The enemy adjusted tactics. Airborne units. Saturation fire. The humans countered with flares, smoke, improvised tripwires, even heat baits. anything not reliant on a grid. One set a shaped charge manually. Another used his rifle bipod to stabilize a makeshift mortar. Adaptation wasn't a feature, it was instinct. And still, the anti-tank rifle fired. Every blast was a statement. We are still here. The battlefield was chaos. But the chaos didn't faze them. It was where they thrived. The rifle's operator shifted position after every few shots, keeping ahead of triangulation, always finding a fresh kill lane. Not once did the weapon fail. Not once did it hesitate. By the time Allied backup arrived from orbit, the enemy advance had already stalled. Wreckage littered the moon's surface. Smoke curled from shattered mechs, ruptured drones, and gouged armor plating. A kill zone, handcrafted by 8 humans, and a weapon designed to end tanks in a century no one respected anymore. Backup ships touched down cautiously. The first thing they saw was the rifle's operator reloading calmly. Helmet off, sweat streaking dust-covered skin. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't posing. He was already planning the next shot. When the dust settled, no one spoke. The battlefield, once a theater of precision drills and technological display, had turned into a graveyard of assumptions. Coalition soldiers walked through the wreckage with quiet awe, stepping over the twisted remains of machines they had once deemed unstoppable. They passed by blackened craters and mangled drone cores, the air still carrying the tang of gunpowder, a scent long forgotten in the age of energy weapons. Command gathered in the aftermath. Tactical debriefs commenced. The humans stood apart. They offered no explanation, no commentary. The anti-tank rifle was back in its case, wrapped in the same weathered cloth. To them, the fight had been just another day. But for everyone else, it was a revelation that refused to fade. Reports circulated rapidly across coalition channels. Engineers requested full diagnostics on a human weapon, trying to quantify its effects. Analysts dissected the engagement frame by frame. But data alone couldn't capture what had happened, because the weapon's strength hadn't just been its penetration or velocity. It was the mindset behind it. Human adaptability wasn't digital. It wasn't synthetic or code-bound. It was built into muscle memory and passed through generations of trial by fire. Their weapons were tools, not systems. Tools that didn't crash when an enemy used electronic warfare. Tools that didn't rely on invisible networks to function. They operated on principles the galaxy had dismissed, and that's exactly why they worked when everything else failed. That terrified people more than the destruction itself. The Saravani delegation filed an inquiry. Why had the humans retained such archaic weapons in the first place? The answer came from a human officer, plain and unvarnished, because they'd been burned before. Their history was full of stories where over-reliance on convenience led to catastrophe. They kept old tools because they never forgot that the future doesn't always arrive on time. For humans, failure wasn't the end. It was a beginning. The anti-tank rifle wasn't a fallback. It was a reminder. When circuits fry, when the grid collapses, when everything smart turns stupid, you fall back on what's real: steel, sweat, and stubbornness. The next day, Coalition High Command held a closed session. No recordings, no announcements. But what followed spoke louder than any statement. Several species requested joint training sessions with human infantry. They wanted to learn how to operate non-networked weapons, how to fight blind, how to read wind without instruments, how to lead without AI projections. For the first time in decades, the Coalition requested knowledge, not technology from Earth. Weapons labs across multiple systems began quietly working on hybrid systems. Not new energy weapons, just updated slug throwers, kinetic artillery, magnetic accelerators that didn't require system calibration, rifles that could function in darkness, silence, and chaos. Machines built to last, not just to impress. And through it all, the myth of the anti-tank rifle grew, not as a magical weapon, but as a symbol of resilience, of deliberate, brutal simplicity. It represented a philosophy alien to most of the galaxy, that there's strength in staying grounded. That progress doesn't mean forgetting what worked. The human operator who had wielded it, never named, never interviewed, became a quiet legend. Not because he sought it, but because he never needed it. The respect he earned came from every mech he dropped, every soldier he protected, and every protocol he proved wrong. He didn't argue with technology. He just outlived it. And now, when coalition forces review their tactical doctrine, there's always a line buried in the contingency protocols. Ensure analog redundancy. A quiet nod to Earth's stubborn children. Other species study war through simulations. Humans remember it through scars. And buried in every armory across the galaxy, beneath the latest plasma cannons and nanoblade rifles, there is now a space reserved for something older, something heavier, something that doesn't need to connect to anything except the will of the person pulling the trigger. Because the next time everything fails, someone will reach for it. And this time, no one will laugh.